What's up everyone, Taiki here. Welcome to the premium video for May 31st. So I'm going to start uploading these videos on WAP. So of course, if you're watching this, you've already gone through these steps, but WAP is this website I use and you have to log in. And then if you go to your dashboard or hub, you should be able to, view all this content. Also, if you want to upgrade your credit card, cancel the subscription, this is how you do it. I've been getting some questions there. So in terms of premium videos, you can kind of see some of these sections. It's not on YouTube. I understand introducing a new platform or change is kind of difficult. But you can still watch these things in 2x speed, have some timestamps here. You can leave a comment like, this video is mid-curve. Maybe there's some useful insights there. And I usually, offer some links, or links that I would usually put in the description, I would also put there. And having these things all in one place, I think is useful. I have this section called Taiki's Farming Playbook. So I just want this section to be more evergreen. So whether you're watching this right now or a month from now, this is a new video. I just uploaded yesterday. But this kind of goes over how I think about airdrop farming. I think this cycle airdrop farming is the new yield farming. Last cycle projects would just introduce tokens, emit them, they would go down, and teams have wised up. They're going to just issuing points. So sometimes people talk about the farmers getting farmed. Maybe the projects and the farmers are on like a more equal level field. But so you have to be more selective when it comes to what types of projects to deploy. So I talk about that. I talk about the theories around, or like my philosophies around single wallet farming versus multi-wallet farming. And if you do farm on multiple wallets, the best practice is to do so. So I might add more videos in the future here as like an onboarding tool. Of course, if you're watching this, you're already onboarded, so it doesn't really matter. But this section, and then maybe this is more useful, Taiki's farming picks. Of course, this might get cluttered over time, but I understand that every week, every month, I talk about new farming opportunities, and it's pretty hard to track. I have the Notion and whatnot, but I think this is more intuitive, where, for example, Gyroscope, like what the hell is Gyroscope? I have some resources here. I have some past premium videos. I have the Arbitrum proposal where the team announced that they're planning the TGA sometime in the next month. I'm not sure if I believe that, but I am, or as of May 30th, I'm holding the GYD stablecoin on Polygon ZKVM for spin points. You can also open up the points, but I think it's relatively underfarmed. I think the stablecoin space is only going to grow. There's not that much excitement for it now, but am I bullish? I could be bullish, so might as well farm to accumulate. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I'll talk about this more later, but right now, the one thing I am farming pretty aggressively, or in the past week, I've been focusing my time on Scroll, and I'll talk about how I'm thinking about it. But last month, Scroll dropped their incentives program called Marks, and they're going to retroactively give people points for providing liquidity, providing TVL, and I am farming on Ambient to double farm Ambient points and Scroll Marks, the wrapped restaked ETH and ETH pool, and I'm also farming stable pairs on Nuri Exchange. And right now on Nuri Exchange, you get these things called petals. To my knowledge, this isn't 100% confirmed, but petals likely have some vesting period where it takes 40 days to vest to some VE token or 120 days to actually get your liquid token. Obviously, this is not ideal, but today I wanted to spend more time on Solidly forks because everyone, obviously understands Airdrome was, a crazy farm, right? This is one of, I have, obviously, if you're in crypto, we have infinite regrets, but this thing I was farming at the ETH USDC pool since launch. I think I deposited liquidity pre-launch just so that I can get tokens right away. And then, I was farming this, it would just go down. And I was like, yeah, this is expected. And then it pumped like 8 cents at some point, I think in early January, or 10 cents. And I just sold. And now, despite being down 50%, it's still trading at $500 million valuation, $1.2 billion FDV. Of course, they are benefiting from the Coinbase listing and I guess the Coinbase team or the base team backing them, somewhat investing in them and whatnot. But I do in the past couple of months, I have noticed this trend that I don't think should be ignored, and it's around Solidly forks just slowly gaining market share relative to Uniswap v3 and relative to other native dexes, which I will talk about today. So, little, I guess, intro. How Solidly works, you can kind of zoom in here, where it's the concept was developed by Andre Cronje. Love him or hate him, he developed this concept, and it's been widely forked. And the idea is, traders, right, use DEX aggregators, DEXs, they pay fees to LPs, and the protocol would, traditionally just give tokens to the LPs. But it's kind of hard to do that, or that's not a perfect model, because what if farmers go to an LP pair that has no volume, but just, get a bunch of tokens because the team set up the emissions. But from a team's perspective, it's impossible to determine, which volumes are going to get the most volume, fees, etc. So Andre said, hey, let's let the lockers, right? So if you lock up your token, VE Arrow, or just any token, the lockers get to decide where the emissions go to the LPs. And LPs, they don't get the fees. So if you're LPing for ETH USDC, at least for Arrow, for example, ETH USDC, this thing has $69 million worth of TVL. The LP gets no fees. They only get the emissions, the Arrow emissions. And who gets the fees? The lockers do. So it's trying to align incentives. So the token lockers are trying to give incentives to pairs that will generate volume, because the more volume it generates, the more fees that the lockers get. Conceptually, it makes sense. I was pretty bearish when Solidly was first introduced back in 2021, just because I thought it was too overhyped, and I was proven right until, let's say, in the past 6 months, where Aerodrome just really took significant market share. And if you look at the Base ecosystem, I believe this is Base. Yeah, so Aerodrome has $700 million worth of TVL, and whereas for Base, actually let me just go to Base chain, Uniswap, significantly less. I think it's easy to be cynical and pessimistic and say that, it's only getting this much TVL, this much volume, because Uniswap can't issue, I guess, tokens, incentivization, and at some point it's all going to end in misery, right? It's all going to be farmed and dumped. But I do think that when sentiment is like this, technically, if you look at the numbers, Aerodrome is just eating Uniswap's launch, at least on the Base chain. Of course, on mainnet, Uni v3 is much superior, but the amount of volume and therefore the fees going to Aerodrome is going parabolic. They recently dropped this new upgrade called the Slipstream, which is their own version of concentrated liquidity. And if you go back to this, and like I said, everything will be in the description below. If you lock up your Arrow and you get these emissions and fees, technically you are getting a pretty decent APR. And there is also like a bribing mechanism, because if you're a project and you want your token to have liquidity, you want the VE Arrow lockers, I suppose, to incentivize liquidity for that pool. So there is also a bribing component, and like I said, I'll provide this in the description below, but you can kind of see, it is getting a lot of volume, it is getting a lot of fees, and I don't think it's something that should be ignored. That being said, I do want to go over other ecosystems, because maybe this is only a Base phenomenon. And little fun fact, I learned this a few months ago, and I kind of dismiss this, but if you go to Reddit, Aerodrome actually has one of the biggest communities, at least on Reddit, out of the DeFi projects and whatnot, which is kind of crazy, because when maybe part of the reason it went parabolic is because retail was just buying Arrow, but you go to the Reddit, the Aerodrome Finance tab here, and then it's like, as a former Arrow hater, as of today, I have become a big fan. Arrow is the next biggest coin on the market, and there's a lot of engagement going on here. Who knows? Maybe this is something to consider, because we always talk about where when is retail coming? Some retail is, at least on Reddit, is super euphoric about Aerodrome. Of course, there are posts people just regretting not selling, and what's the next Aerodrome? I mean, who knows, right? Like maybe Aerodrome isn't like the next new meta. And I also get questions like, okay, like, like you talk about airdrop farming, but like, what's like the next Avalanche, right? Like the DeFi Rush. I mean, unfortunately, there is never going to be like the next Polygon incentive mechanism program. There's never going to be like Avalanche Rush. There's never going to be these types of things because, I mean, yeah, like that was what happened last cycle. But technically Aerodrome was one of the best farms out there. I think I farm and dump my Aero for like $7,000 or something. I mean, if I just waited, it could have been like a like $100,000 farm and dump, which would have been crazy. So maybe it's only on base, but I beg to differ. If you go to Optimism, still Velodrome has 2x the TVL of Uniswap, still generating more fees. Linea, if you go to, so this is the ZK EVM backed by Consensus, the creators of MetaMask. They're doing this Linea Surge campaign where it's going to run for 6 months. So this started last month, but it's either going to run for 6 months or until they reach $3 billion in TVL, whichever comes first. The reason I'm not that bullish Linea, and the reason I favor Scroll, which I'll talk about more later, is because, Consensus, like I'm not really bullish on them to drop tokens. They've been teasing the MetaMask token for quite some time, and I mean it's still not out. There was like the Linea Voyage, and now they're introducing Linea Surge, and I really don't know when they're actually going to drop the token. However, I mean the TVL is technically up only. It's pretty crazy. I would not have expected this. And this is one of the reasons why, I do think it's still worth considering farming these ZK EVMs. The user experience is not that great. The user interface is not that great. But I do think that, these ZK rollups are, maybe one cycle behind optimistic rollups. And I've talked to a bunch of ZK teams, and, even Vitalik mentions that he thinks ZK is the end game. And I think at some point Optimism, Arbitrum, they're probably going to pivot to becoming a ZK rollup once the infrastructure is more built out. So, I don't really think ZK VM is going to be a crazy narrative, at least in 2024, but maybe it's more of a 2025 thing. And if that's the case, then yeah, like maybe farming things like Scroll Linea might be worth it. But Linea has $1 billion worth of TVL. There's a bunch of Galaxy quests and like random click farming that happened. So for that reason, I'm not that particularly bullish. But I mean, if you just measure a chain success by TVL, it's technically very, very successful. And the highest TVL DEX on Linea is Nile, which is a Solidity fork. And it's TVL's up only. Tokens doing okay. Technically it's going up, but I mean market cap is pretty tiny. And I think what I've realized in the past couple of months is that if you look at, I guess, existing ecosystems like let's say Arbitrum, the number one TVL app is still Uniswap, and followed by Camelot, and I think and this balancer, and then there's like Ramses, which is like all the way down here, which is like a Solidity DEX. I think the only way these Solidity DEXs can actually become the number one DEX is if they launch early and introduce a token, because Ramses, for example, I'll talk about it later, but I mean they are doing pretty good, but it's really, really hard to compete with Uniswap once they already have once there's already liquidity locked. Liquidity tends to be sticky in DeFi. Of course, it only takes a few clicks to move from one app to another. But I think the reason Aerodrome did so well is because, I mean, they were really, really early to launch, and they worked closely with the base team, and they got a grant, and now they kind of cemented themselves as the number one DEX. You can say the same for Optimism. The Velodrome team really was very, very fast to fork solidly, deploy an Optimism, and because they forked or because they deployed really early, they were able to get Optimism grants. They gave those Optimism grants to people that locked their token, and got somewhat of a community. And basically, the playbook is launch early on a chain, introduce a token earlier on in the cycle, and capture that TVL. And then once you capture that TVL, once these chains drop a token, they can get these grants and incentivize lockers, etc. That's typically the playbook that I've seen, and it seems like it's happening for Linea and Nile as well. One thing about Ramses, which I want to talk about, so of course, I mean, TVL is not that great, but if you actually look at, so I'm not sure if these numbers are real because But I mean, according to DeFi Llama, Ramses already is the number two DEX, or the second DEX when it comes to volume behind Uniswap, of course. And they're doing this on very low TVL. Ramses, I mean, the chart looks like this. They basically launched when Arbitrum did the airdrop, and then it was literally down only. And then recently it like kind of pumped, retraced, and now it's doing okay. If you actually look at like the numbers, I mean, this is pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive if you kind of think about it. Their volume seems to be ramping up. TVL, I mean, it's not that high, but it is ramping up. I think it's pretty easy to be jaded and cynical around, I guess, like farm tokens and whatnot. But I mean, on paper, this model does make sense. I think it's a better model than what exists right now. Uniswap technically is the number one DEX across all chains. In theory, but the problem with Uniswap is that, they can't really offer support on every single chain because they are a pretty small team, and they're more focused on shipping UniV4 hooks and maintaining its market share lead on ETH mainnet, because that's their North Star. So they're not really going to allocate resources on like all these L2s. So realistically, on these L2s, I think realistically on these L2s, I think a Solidly fork is eventually going to be the number one DEX. And if you believe that, maybe it's worth buying, or maybe not buying because they are farm tokens technically. If you don't lock up your Solidity hook, or if you don't lock up your tokens, then technically you do get diluted, and the only way to participate in the ecosystem is by locking. So it does encourage active participants in the space, which I guess is also good for community. I guess Arbitrum. Even Arbitrum. Look at this TVL; it is technically going up. And though everyone hates Arbitrum or Optimism because it's the token's not doing well, from like a TVL perspective, it is doing fairly well. And of course, some of it is because ETH is going up and whatnot, and the market's going up. But I do think that stablecoins are flowing to these chains. And Ramses, the metrics are improving. And let's go back to Scroll. So going back, sorry, I have many tabs open, so it's kind of hard to navigate all these things. But okay, so there you go. So like I said, you can go to the WAP tab, farming picks, and kind of just read through all these things here and there. And then, what am I doing with Scroll? So, I guess the two L2s that you can farm is Linea and Scroll, because they both have some points per gram. ZK Sync is going to drop a token, but honestly, I'm not really bullish ZK Sync. I think Linea and Scroll has more potential. I think the problem with all these ZK teams is that there's a lot of infighting. You recently saw that Matter Labs, like the team behind ZK Sync, kind of trademarked the ZK tag, and there's a bunch of drama. But at the end of the day, just drop good drop a good product, and people will eventually come. But I think the ZK tech is probably still 6 to 12 months away. But that being said, I'm farming Ambient, and I'm also farming Neri, because Neri is also a VE33, the Solidly fork DEX. And though the TVL is very low, I think they do have it. Sushi, it's not going to win. Dodo is not going to win. V3 not going to win. I'm not really that positive on these things. And the Neri team is behind. The Ramses team is behind Neri. And I recently found out about this, but the Ramses team, it kind of feels like a cabal, but the Ramses team is behind a bunch of Solidly forks on every single chain. I think you can interpret that in a few ways. Maybe they're parasitic. They're just deploying and forking and launching to just capture fees and whatnot. But I do think that I've listened to a couple Twitter Spaces, and I do think that they are actually trying to be the number one DEX on Arbitrum, and I guess. Successfully, they are the number one DEX on at least Linea, and I think there's a reasonable path for them to become the number one DEX on Scroll. So, like I mentioned, right now it's pre-token. You can farm these petals, and these petals likely, right, whenever they introduce a token, they're probably going to have a vesting schedule. So I believe it was like this for other Ramses forks. and it's not ideal. But if you're farming Scroll for like the points program, then basically I think I have like an equal amount of dollars into Ambient and Neri, and I think Neri has way more upside. But let's discuss what I'm doing. So in terms of stablecoin farms, I have capital in USDC and DAI, just because yes, it gets half the emissions as USDC and Tether, but it has less than half the TVL. So technically, I'm getting more points, or yeah, I'm getting a better share, and I'm also depositing into ETH and Stone. So Stone is the liquid staking derivative. If you're a Humble Farm Army member, you're aware of Stone. I think the TVL Stone market cap is roughly $500 million. They're trying to raise right now at like a $200 million market cap or FDV, and the team seems pretty strong. I think they're based in Asia, but it's not like they're not going to rug essentially. So I'm in this pool, and if you zoom into this, so this is like actually my position, and the problem with these concentrated liquidity positions is that I believe you get more incentive, you get more petals the tighter you are in the range, and I think that's one of the reasons why despite USDC ETH having like 300,000 petals, it doesn't have that much TVL, and like all these different pools, just because it's pretty hard to manage. I guess if you click here, right, like waiting for this to load, maybe I have to connect my wallet, but anyways, it's yeah, you get what I mean. It's pretty hard to manage, and I prefer these stable pairs like ETH Stone or stablecoin pairs, just because it's easier to manage. But for me, this is my range. So right now, the price of Stone, the price of Stone is like roughly 1.02, but the actual price is 1.018, and they have like this auto liquidity provision button, but if the actual price is 1.018, then I don't want to do like a pair with like equal sizing. I'd rather weigh it more to the left, I suppose, right? Just so that once it gets back to I guess the fair market price, it should go down, and there's not that much liquidity down here. So typically these things tend to trade below peg, just because it has less liquidity than ETH and wrap staked ETH. So my range is between 1.0146 and 1.0217, and I guess I got 1,500 petals. I'm sure you can see this 1,500 petals, and then also whatever, like 40 cents in fees, like whatever, right? So this is what I'm doing. I think I think it's a decent farm. Like obviously, just because I'm doing this doesn't mean that you have to do it. But I guess I am in the arena. I'm depositing, I am depositing capital into this Solidly fork with less than $2 million worth of TVL. And I am thinking about like setting ranges and stuff. So if you want, come here, right? You can dilute my yields. But obviously, I think a safer farm is Ambient Finance, just because they're all doxed. They've been around longer. But like seeing this trend around the Solidly forks, just one. I mean, Base does not have a token, but I mean, like this thing is literally at a 1 billion FDV. Nile Exchange on Linea is the number one DEX. TVL is going parabolic. Token's not doing so hot. I mean, I guess it is doing pretty well. Maybe you can make an argument to like buy this thing, but this market is still pretty PPP, so I'm not really that interested in like just like buying things like this, though it could go up. I mean, obviously in hindsight I should have bought the Arrow token, or like just kept the Arrow token. I was like way too bearish. I was like way too bearish. Ramses, I mean, like I'm not necessarily like that bullish. Ramses, I would much rather like buy Nile, just because once Linea does an airdrop at some point, they're probably going to incentivize liquidity on Nile. TVL probably goes up more, and of course once an airdrop happens, like on Linea, if there's a Linea token, there has to be liquidity for that token. So naturally, TVL is going to go up on Nile Exchange as a result. Same can be said for Neri. So typically, I lean more bullish on, I guess, these Solidly forks. for L2s that don't have a token, just because in the future there will be a token, and that's going to be like a positive catalyst for the ecosystem and the DEX project going forward. So, I think I would consider, or I guess like the point of the video is don't fade these solidly forks. It is working, and I mean like the numbers back it. Who knows? Like I wouldn't be surprised if Ramses ends up flipping UDV3. It might take a few months, but I think it's definitely possible. And I guess my way of, being bullish, I guess this particular ecosystem, like the solidly fork ecosystem, right now is to farm Nuri, and I'm doing this so via stablecoin pairs, Tether USDC, DAI USDC, and Stone ETH. And this is one example of a position that I'm doing where I'm farming petals and I'm also farming scroll marks. So that's gonna be it for me. I guess in terms of market, I did have this particular tab. So, I guess I've had this view that I think ETH has put in a bottom, and no one really knows when the ETFs are going to start to trade, but I have this rough range here between 0.06567 and 0.056, and that's characterized because on October 17th, that was when the Bitcoin parabolic rally started, and on June 15th. That was when BlackRock filed for the ETF, and that also led to the parabolic run in BTC. I think it makes sense for eBTC to settle somewhere in between this range. It's going to take time for these things to go up. Similarly to how eBTC took a while for it to go down, I would expect it to just go up slowly. I'm not saying that I think it's going to go to new highs or anything, but I think it's just going to slowly grind up from here, week over week, and I think it's going to be relatively brutal. If you're for a person that's just expecting up only price action. I've long talked about this fractal where it seems like the ETH price action kind of seems to be mimicking that of Bitcoin price action. So last summer we had the whole selling May go away, that was the meme, and then out of nowhere BlackRock filed for the Bitcoin ETF, and then Bitcoin just pumped a lot, roughly 20%. And though people were bullish and thought it was going to go much higher, it did put in a double top, and then people, remember last year, everyone was so negative, everyone was so bearish. Even myself, I was kind of tired and just generally just tired, generally tired, and the pump happened later in the year. So it did eventually pump, right? The bulls were right, but it just took a little bit longer. We kind of had to wait for an actual date of the Bitcoin ETF going live, and also to see the inflows. That's what it took for Bitcoin to go parabolic. I think you can see a similar situation happening for ETH. It's pretty similar, right? We just had the market go up. We had the selling May go away narrative, and then surprise ETF announcement, and then ETH just pumped 20% in that single day. And now technically ETH didn't even put in a higher high. So is it possible for ETH to put in a double top? Just generally outperform the markets where ETH BTC goes up over time. ETH dominance also goes up, and then maybe what takes or the thing that takes ETH to go much higher, which I think is everyone's base case, is for there to actually be a timeline for the ETH ETF, and to actually see the inflows, right, the positive inflows into ETH, because the bear case is still that no one wants to buy the ETH ETF. If you look at other countries, so the ETH ETF exists in Canada and Hong Kong, and of course the size is barely anything, but in Canada, the ETH ETF has 34% of the flows that Bitcoin ETF had, and in Hong Kong, I think it's roughly 19%. So I think it's gonna be roughly in this range. I think the base case that the Bloomberg analysts have been saying is roughly 15%, but they were also wrong about the ETH ETF, and they lean more Bitcoin maxi, and I think they're a little bit too pessimistic. I think roughly 20% is kind of what I'm expecting, and if that's the case, then that's going to be $3 to $4 billion worth of $3 to $4 billion worth of flows. That is significant. I do think it's gonna drive prices higher. I'm not sure how sustainable these things are gonna be, and that's gonna be the biggest narrative going forward. But I do my base case is that I think ETH outperforms just the average coin out there. Also, I think ETH also outperforms Bitcoin. there's this singular event that everyone is looking forward to, and Bitcoin already hit all-time highs. ETH has not hit all-time highs. I think generally people expect all-time highs, and then people start to do like this, risk-reward scenario where to all-time highs, it's like roughly like a 28% gain. Maybe like ETH goes down a little bit more, but even if ETH goes down, that only just promises like much higher returns, right? If ETH goes down to like 3,300, then it's roughly like a 50% return to all-time highs. So I do think that there are going to be buyers for ETH. I don't think there's that much leverage in the ecosystem, and people just want up-only price action. But I do think that people have to account for this type of scenario. And my general idea is that I'm open to this. I'm long ETH, right? I bullish ETH, and I'm just airdrop farming my balls off with my ETH. I have funds on Kinto. I have funds on Mitosis. I don't have Kinto on here just because you can't farm it anymore. But I do think that Scroll is a pretty good place to farm or park your ETH, just because I do think they are going to TGE or at least this year. We have ZK Sync dropping a token, like the ZK EVM. We have Linea, introducing a program. Now Scroll, right, is feeling the pressure. They're all introducing points. And then I think reasonably Scroll is going to TGE before Linea. And if that's my base, like I said, I have no inside information. I have no idea. But just my read is that, if Scroll is going to TGE before Linea. Linea has $1 billion at the TVL. Scroll has much less TVL. It's much less underfarmed. So, I'm going to farm Scroll. I do expect this to go up. I think it's going to, go up over time. So, the faster you get in, I guess like the more, more percentage of the points you get. It's unfortunate because, we don't really know like when these things are going to launch. But I do think that Scroll is going to TGE sometime this year. But that being said, that's kind of my views. Don't fade the Solidity forks. I think, the data supports that it's working. And if it's working, then, and like follow the Reddit, right? What's the next aerodrome? What is the next aerodrome? Maybe it's Nile. Maybe it's Ramses. Maybe it's Neri. I just don't have the risk appetite to like buy these tokens, honestly. So I'm just going to farm this thing. And just because there's so little TPL, I think that, I can potentially be a larger holder of like this thing whenever it does launch, or like at least like these Petals things. So yeah. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think about like this section. I guess as a bonus video, you can watch this too. If you've been around, you probably already know like my thoughts on this. But I talk about like multi-wallets farming and whatnot. Thank you guys, and see you guys next week. Bye bye.